contains so much information in it. So only Hashem himself would possibly have written the Mishnah. Similar way, I think that it's pretty clear that when you learn a Rashi Sikha, you see the infinity of Hashem in the Rashi. So let's go right to a Rashi, this week's Torah portion. The Torah this week discusses all the holidays. And before discussing all the holidays, it mentions Shabbos. The Torah says 6 days you should do work, and the seventh day is Shabbos. And then discusses all the other holidays. So Rashi has both his commentary and he has the heading for each passage of his commentary. So on the words 6 days, Rashi comments on the word 6 days. He says, this teaches us the fact that Torah puts together the Shabbos with all the other holidays. Why does the Torah put together Shabbos with all the other holidays? To teach you, anyone who desecrates the holidays, it's as if they're desecrating Shabbos. Anyone who keeps the holidays, it's as if they're keeping all the Shabbos. So if Rashi is bothered by why is Shabbos written in the Torah next to all the holidays, if that's the issue that he has, that's his question. So then his heading in this commentary should have included some words about Shabbos. But Bashi just quotes the words 6 days, Sichos Yom. He leaves out anything about Shabbos. He doesn't even hint to Shabbos with the word etc. He doesn't say like 6 days, etc., which would have included, the etc. would have included the rest of the verse. Instead, Rashi just says 6 days. So if the fact that there's no etc. there means that he's not at all referring to the rest of the verse. He's only quoting 6 days and that's all. The question is, why does Rashi quote the words 6 days if his real question is, what does Shabbos have to do with the holidays? So there are other instances where Rashi quotes a few words as a title for a subject. For example, back in Parshas Tetzaveh, we're learning about the various garments of the Kohen Gadol. When we got up to the ephod, the apron that the Kohen Gadol wears, Rashi quotes the words, and you shall make the ephod, this apron. And Rashi says, I can't tell you what each word of the Torah means as we go along, because that will confuse you. Instead, Rashi says, before we begin, I'm going to the general picture what the ephod looks like. Then I can go over on each phrase of the Torah and then explain how each phrase, what each phrase means. But I can't explain this to you as we go along because it'll be too confusing. So Rashi uses the words, and you shall make the apron, as a title to the subject of the apron, not as I'm going to explain this phrase. Rather, the words, and you shall make the ephod, it's a title for the entire section. There's a similar thing also done in this week's Torah portion where there is a repetition of a whole verse. Rashi uses the words, and the Torah repeats the words, these are the holidays of God. So Rashi, instead of using those words as an introduction to a section or whatever, instead of using those words as a title for his commentary, he used those words rather as a title for a section. What's this whole verse doing? So perhaps the same thing could be about the word 6 days. That Rashi's interest in bringing those words is not because Rashi wants to explain those words, but rather he is using those words as a title for the whole section of Shabbos. The problem with that explanation is that in the instances where Rashi resorts to using words of the Torah as a title for a section, the title, like the title of a book, fits the section. You shall make the ephod, fits the subject of what is an ephod all about. the title, these are the holidays of God, that explains where Rashi is going. However, the word 6 days, there's nothing in that title that tells you that we're talking about Shabbos. It's just 6 days. It's a non-appropriate title. If the subject is Shabbos, the word should have been something about Shabbos. You can't say that what Rashi means when he says 6 days is he's using this as just a title to discuss the section about Shabbos, because that title has no Shabbos in it. So it's not an appropriate title. Another question about this Rashi, which I think is something that people just gloss over. A lot of times Rashi, they don't think of it. There could be an explanation. There's so many things that we don't understand that there's a switch in our minds that says, stop, do you actually understand what you're reading? But sometimes when people read Torah and they're not as critical as when they read other parts of anything else, because they're used to not understanding Torah, so therefore they don't think about it critically. But here's an obvious question. Rashi says, anyone who desecrates the holidays, it's as if they desecrate the Shabbos. When he keeps the holidays, it's as if they keep the Shabbos. Why does he start off in the negative? Especially because the Torah is not saying anything negative. The Torah is saying you should keep the Shabbos. The Torah's not talking about the consequence for not keeping Shabbos. So how come Rashi begins with the words, and if you desecrate the Shabbos, if you desecrate the holiday? What does Rashi mean? Why does Rashi begin with a negative? So you might want to answer that, what's the point of the Torah equating the holidays with the Shabbos? So what's the point of the Torah putting these things together? The Torah wants to caution us and tell us, don't think that the holidays aren't as important as Shabbos. You might think the days of the week are established by God. Since they're established by God, Shabbos is very important. However, the holidays are established by the court's arrangement of the month. And since the whole arrangement of the month is by what human beings do, therefore it's not as important to keep the holidays as it is. I think the Bashi writes that there are no cultures at all in the world that don't have a 7-day week. Why is there a 7-day week in all cultures? It's because of the 7 days of creation. 6 days Hashem created the world, and the 7th day he rested. So the pasuk over here is coming to clarify that the holidays are as important as Shabbos, even though the holidays were arranged by the Jewish court. So that's the thrust, that's the goal of the verse. Therefore, Rashi's interpretation is, don't think that desecrating the holidays is less than desecrating the Shabbos. Okay, so although there's a plausible explanation for why the desecration of the holidays is mentioned, however, Rashi is drawing his explanation from the verse. He's trying to explain the verse. So the very first thing to do to explain the verse would have made sense to first say what the verse is saying. The interpretation of why the verse is saying what it's saying could be next. But the very first thing Rashi should have said is, if you keep the Shabbos, keep the holidays, it's like keeping Shabbos. Then you should add, and it's really important, because if you desecrate the holidays, if you desecrate the Shabbos, the interpretation and the guidance for us is a secondary point that's not mentioned clearly in the Torah, and therefore it should have been mentioned second. Rashi is trying to translate the verse, therefore why is it mentioned at first? Okay, so answer is like this. Rashi's question, what does Shabbos have to do with the holidays? Why is Shabbos mentioned over here with all the other holidays? Is not such a strong question. Because after all, Shabbos is a designated day like all the other holidays for a day of holiness, day when it's forbidden to work. So it's not such a strong question. Why does the Torah include Shabbos with all the other holidays? It is different to other holidays because, again, it's not something that God set up in the fabric of creation. It's something that Hashem empowers Jewish court to do. However, we could find many plausible explanations of why the Torah put together the Shabbos of all the other holidays. One explanation might be to tell us the distinction, how Shabbos is different to the holidays. Again, Shabbos is not dependent on Jewish birth, and instead, Shabbos is not dependent on Jewish birth, only the holidays depend on Jewish birth. Another distinction between Shabbos and the holidays is that on Shabbos, it's permissible to make food to eat, and on the holidays, it's forbidden. On Shabbos, it's forbidden to make food to eat, and on the holidays, it's permissible to make ichol nefesh. It's permissible to do work to make the food of the holidays. So that's why the Torah may have another plausible explanation of why the Torah included in the subject of the holidays would have mentioned the Shabbos to show the distinction between the Shabbos and the holidays. That's why that's a perfectly plausible explanation that we would have thought, even if Rashi wouldn't have said anything. So that's not really Rashi's question. What's bothering Rashi is the intro. The Torah says 6 days you should work. Why is that intro necessary here? If this was the very first time the Torah told us about Shabbos, so then the intro would be necessary. Why would it be necessary? Because when God is telling us that you cannot work one day of the week, all of a sudden David LeBel raises his hand and says, 1 second, we're not going to work. So Hashem would have to answer and say, no. 6 days, you go to work. Just the seventh day I'm telling you not to work. That's when the Torah first introduces the mitzvah of Shabbos. However, when the Torah has already told us about Shabbos, and here it's repeating something we know already, and the question then is, why is it mentioned this 6-day thing? We know about 6 days you should work. Why is it mentioned here? It just should tell us the seventh day of Shabbos. Why is it important to say that 6 days you should work? The fact that the Torah says, when the Torah originally mentions the 6 days, besides telling us that you're allowed to work the 5 days of the week, there's other plausible why the Torah mentions the 6 days. The Torah is telling you why you should keep Shabbos, because God worked, so to speak, for 6 days before resting the Shabbos, so we too should work for 6 days. Also, it says 6 days you should work, and you're supposed to feel that your work is done when Shabbos arrives, to feel you have nothing to do, it's all taken care of, that no work needs to be done. That's another reason why the Torah mentions why the Torah originally mentions the 6 days of work when talking about Shabbos, telling us when Shabbos comes to feel it's all done. But here, in the Parshas Emor, where the subject is not about keeping Shabbos, it's only mentioned parenthetically in the context of all the holidays. The question is, what's the purpose of the introductory phrase, 6 days you should work? Why is that necessary? So to answer this question, how this answers it, we're going to see soon, but just the crux of the answer is that with asking the question, what does Shabbos have to do with all the other holidays? Am I answering that anyone who desecrates the holidays, it's like desecrating Shabbos? By saying those words, Rashi is explaining to us what the purpose is of the words 6 days you should work. That's Rashi's intent. Rashi's intent is not about explaining what Shabbos has to do with the holidays. That's not such a big question. There are easier answers for that. Rashi's problem is, why does the Torah say 6 days you should work? So answers like this. What's going on? How do those words, how does Rashi answer that question? By saying anyone who desecrates the holidays is like desecrating Shabbos. The words 6 days could be translated in two different ways. One is, there are 6 separate days when you're allowed to work. But here, the word 6 days means something else. 6 days here means a period of time. Like Rashi says later on about the word shivas. Shivas, no, Dr. Bressman is not just a mashkir we have last Shabbos. Shivas means a period of 7. Shmeinas means a period of 8. Sheshes means a period of 6. It's not 6 separate days. The word sheshes yama means a time period that includes 6 days. It's a title of a time period. And that's what the Torah means when it says sheshes yamim. In this time period, you could do work. Hashem made a separate entity of time, which we're referring to with the words sheshes yamim. We're referring to this time period as with the word 6 days. When and only in this time period is the work allowed to be done. That means that all other times which are not in this time period of the sixth day title, which aren't included in the 6 day title, not part of this time that's designated for work. All other times are not included in that title, in that classification, are all forbidden to work. Here, Hashem is saying there are 6 days you could work. He's not saying to us, Hashem could have said you could work Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. He's not saying that. He's saying, I made a separate category of time when you could work. I'm calling that time period 6 days because usually it's 6 days. But not only referring to 6 days of the week, I'm referring to all the times when you're allowed to work. Since most of the time that's 6 days, so I'm referring to it as 6 days, but I don't mean specifically Sunday to Friday. I am telling you there are days that I've classified and I've designated when you can work. So now it's understood why the Torah puts those words as an intro to all the holidays. The Torah is actually delineating two time periods. There is a time period called 6 days. We're calling it 6 days. That's a time period. And that time period, you're allowed to work. And there's another time period, every other time period, which is not included in those 6 days, work is forbidden. So the Torah is actually delineating not just the weekdays from Shabbos, but all days when it's not holiday and it's not Shabbos, both, whenever Hashem hasn't forbidden work, that's a different time period. So it's understood why we learn that anyone who desecrates the holidays, it's as if they desecrated the Shabbos. Anyone who keeps the holidays, it's as if they keep the Shabbos, even though the punishment for breaking the holidays is not the same as the punishment for breaking Shabbos. But the reason why we're equating them is not in regards to the punishment, but rather in regards to the kind of thing that you're doing, the kind of time period that you have desecrated. Hashem has not designated this time as a time for work. There's a time Hashem has designated for work that we're calling that the 6 day time period. And there's another time period which is not designated for work. And that includes the holidays, and includes Shabbos. Those days are not designated. Those days work is forbidden. So it's all anything which is not part of the days which work is permissible, which we're calling it the 6 day time period. All other days, whether it's a holiday, whether it's Shabbos, work is forbidden. So now I understand why Rashi only titles his explanation with the words 6 days. He doesn't even mention the word, doesn't even add the word etc. Rashi wants to say, with just quoting the word 6 days, that the 6 days are a separate classification than anything else. The fact that Torah continues and says the 7th day is Shabbos is it's a new point. There are 2 time periods. The first phrase in the verse says there's a time period when work is permissible. Any other time it's forbidden. And then Torah then lists the 7th day as a day when as an example of a time when work is forbidden. It's not the only one. And Rashi doesn't even quote in this title 6 days you should work. He doesn't quote you 6 days you should work, because his point isn't to tell us that you should work during those 6 days. He's saying this is a time period which, unlike the holidays, unlike the Shabbos, when you can work. So he doesn't want to quote the word 6 days you should work, because that's not the point. The point is these are the difference, the demarcation that we're associating the first 6 the days of the week, or all days when there's no Shabbos, no holiday. What's significant about those days is that you are allowed to work. Not that you have to, not that you should, but that you can. As opposed to all other days where you're not allowed to work. That's the line in the sand that we're drawing. There are days when you can, and days when you can't. These are days, 6 days are days when it's not forbidden. Not forbidden. It's also possible that with the word 6 days, Rashi is using that as a title for the end of the phrase, you can work. As we started off saying about the Ephod, perhaps you could say that Rashi also is saying 6 days to include the rest of the phrase, you can work, but not the end of the verse about Shabbos. Rashi just wants to say the 6th day you can work thing. Okay. Now we also understand our question, why Rashi is so negative. Rashi says, anyone who desecrates the holiday is like desecrating the Shabbos. Why does he start off with a negative? Since the general comparison of the holidays to Shabbos is derived from where? From the fact that we are classifying all other times, as times when work can be done. So it comes out that what is the verse really saying? The verse is talking about the desecration of the holidays. The verse is saying that Hashem has made a limitation in time. He's saying there are only in these 6 days can work be done. Only these 6 days. So if you try to bring into that time period any other time, which is not part of those 6 days, you're desecrating, you're violating the border that God made in creation. God made a border in creation that only in this time is work permissible. And now you have tried to draw into that time other times when work is not permissible. That's the issue. The verse is talking about the prohibition of working. The verse is talking about how there are times when you are allowed to work and any other time you're not. So therefore, Rashi begins with saying if you desecrate the holidays, you desecrate the Shabbos. The equation between them is clear. Hashem has not designated any other time as a time to work. Okay. So that explains the simple meaning of what Rashi is saying. Now let's go. Rashi is called the wine of Torah because there are secrets of the Torah in Rashi. So there is an opinion brought by the Mechilta that when it says in the Torah you should keep Shabbos, it's not just, as you said before, just something you're allowed to do, but it's a mitzvah to work. The language of the Mechilta is, Mechilta of Shimbi Yofai, he says, just like the Jewish people are commanded to keep the Shabbos, so they're commanded to work. It's a mitzvah to work. That means doing work during the 6 days of the week is not just something you're allowed to do, it's something you have to do. As is known that when God tells us in the Torah, I will bless you in all that you do, he's telling us you have to do something. You have to make a vessel in nature for my blessing. On the other hand, we have to know why that's true. Why is it necessary to work? The reason it's necessary to work is because of the body of the Jew. Because the neshama is in the body. And because the body conceals godliness. So the Torah says that we must act according to the order of nature. Like the Talmud says, do not rely on a miracle. The Talmud says the law of the land is a law. So because the soul has entered the body, so we have to act according to the body conceals godliness. We have to act in sync with this, with the way Hashem has instructed us in the Torah to reckon with nature. That's because of our body, which conceals godliness. However, looking at things from the perspective of our neshama, the neshama of a Jew, not only is there no need to do work, on the contrary, not only do we not need work, we shouldn't really work because the neshama is not at all in the same realm as the body in its nature. As Rebbe Rashab famously declared, not with our will did we enter the exile, not with our will will we leave the exile, but all nations of the world should know that only our bodies are in exile, are not our neshamas. Our neshama is above the concealment of godliness in the world. Neshama is higher than this. The neshama stands in front of Hashem. The neshama is in front of God. And because the neshama is in front of God, so just like it says in the Talmud that if you're in front of a king, you're not allowed to make any movement at all. You're not allowed to signal your friend and say to your friend, hey, I want to talk to you when you're in front of a king. So to the neshama is in front of God. The neshama doesn't have a concealment. The neshama is face to face with Hashem. So therefore, it should be forbidden, not just from the perspective of the soul. Not only do we have to work, it should be forbidden to work. It's similar to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai famously said, I wish we could daven all day. Let's say you did. Let's say you davened all day. Let's say you spent all day davening, as some great Hasidim did. They davened literally all day. As it says in the Hayom Yom, that some Hasidim, they would daven Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. No, it would take them all day for Shachris, and Mincha would go into Ma'ariv. So during the whole time that you're davening, you're not allowed to you're in front of Hashem. There's different rules. It's forbidden to work all day. Just like you're not allowed to make any movements in front of the king. So if you're davening, you're not allowed to work. So from the perspective of the neshama is davening all day. And therefore the neshama shouldn't work. The neshama should be Shabbos. And these are the two extremes that God asks us to have. On the one hand, during the 6-day period, when according to Torah, we must take care of the body. There's an obligation. There's a mitzvah. You have to work. But in the days of Shabbos and Yontif, when the light of the neshama shines more, which is the difference between Shabbos and the weekday in general, then on Shabbos, we say in Kiddush tonight, Hashem can finish making the world on the 7th day, which also means Hashem, Elokim means concealment. On the Shabbos, no concealment. Shabbos is the first time the Torah uses the word Yud Kei Vav Kei is on Shabbos. Shabbos is a revelation of God. So on Shabbos, not just in the world, but also in ourselves, light of the neshama shines. So we have to stand on Shabbos above the body, above all the affairs of the body, above the nature of the body. And therefore, it's out of the question to do work on Shabbos. It's out of the question. And these are the two extremes God asks us to have. On the one hand, he tells us, you're in a soul, you're in a body, you have to reckon with Hashem. I'm telling you, I want my blessing to be garbed in the garment of nature. I want there to be something hidden. Therefore, yes, you should deal with the body and deal with the world according to the rules of nature. That's what Hashem is telling us on the one hand. On the other hand, he flips it on us on Shabbos. Says, 1 second, you guys have neshamas. On a Shabbos, on neshamas shine more. On Yontif, on neshamas shine more. And that time, Hashem tells us, whoa, it's out of the question. You should work. You're in front of me. Why do you need to feed yourself? You're in front of the king. It's not time to engage in doing anything in front of the king. You're standing in front of the king. There's no reason for you to do anything because the king's taking care of you. You're in front of the king. So, but Hashem married a neshama to our body. So the Rebbe concludes, since the neshama is above the body, it also affects the body as well. In the footnote, Rebbe mentions another concept which he asked on another occasion, briefly. The Rebbe asked, what's the significance of the Rebbe Rashab saying that our soul didn't go into exile? Our soul didn't go into exile, it's fine. But our soul happens to be in the body. Since our body is in exile, so the soul, post facto, is also in exile. So what's the meaning of Rebbe Rashab saying only our bodies are in exile? And Rebbe basically explains, just like when Yitzchak was born, he was born through a miracle, and our whole existence as a people was born through the first child's birth as a miracle to signify that by Jews, as who was it? I think it was when Ben-Gurion said that a Jew not believing in a miracle is not being real with reality. Miracles are part of our existence. Or getting to our day-to-day, Ebbe said the difference between a Jew and others is that when something happens to you in your life, a non-Jew tries to rationalize it in nature, and if he can't, he says, okay, something extraordinary happened, something above nature happened. But a Jew, Ebbe says, his very first response to anything that happens in life is, oh, wow, it's a miracle of God. That's his first response because a Jew is above nature. Even in our soul, in our body, the soul affects the body as well. And therefore, we don't have to feel encumbered by the body and feel that we have to, we're stuck and we have to lessen our principles because we're stuck in the body. Rather, the soul's presence in our body, the power of the neshama shines in the body, and as the soul is above the body, so too the neshama affects the body to also not be limited, not be stuck, and not be unable to do what has to get done until when the neshama will take the body out of the exile simply. Mashiach comes. The neshama actually takes the body out of exile. The true Mashiach Tzakenu, but a mamash. All right.